Most people think starting YouTube after 50 is a disadvantage, but the platform belongs to younger creators who grew up with cameras, editing software, and social media skills. But something surprising happens when you actually look at the channels that build the most trust. Many of them didn't start with young creators at all. And after starting a YouTube channel myself at 60, I realized something very unexpected. The very thing that you might think would hold you back can actually become your biggest asset, your biggest advantage. Because there are two things the people over 50 bring to YouTube that many younger creators spend years trying to develop and often without much success. And once you see what these are, you'll never look at starting a channel later in life the same way again. Maybe you've thought about starting something new and immediately felt like you were already too late. Because let's be honest for a moment, when someone over 50 like ourselves thinks about starting a YouTube channel, the first thoughts are seldom positive. For example, when I first ran the idea past a few friends, I got comments like, "I thought YouTube was for young people playing games. Isn't it a waste of time? You won't make any money at that," one guy said. And then you open up YouTube yourself and it feels like everybody on the platform is 20 or something. They talk super fast, they use jump cuts every 5 seconds and bright lights to keep you engaged, and you just feel lost. They have perfect thumbnails. Slowly, a quiet assumption starts to form in your own head. You begin to think, I'm too late. But here's what almost nobody realizes. YouTube is not actually a competition about age. And whilst it's a competition about attention, there's also one more very important factor, and that's trust. And trust behaves very differently than people think. I remember the moment I decided to upload my video. I had the camera ready, the topic prepared, but I still sat there hesitating. And a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe YouTube is something people should start in their 20s, not at my age. But I was fed up talking myself out of something before I even started. So I just thought, what the hell? And so I pressed the record button anyway and just saw what happened. And something interesting did happen. Not in the views and not in the comments, but in how many people responded in conversation with me afterwards. They didn't ask me about the editing. They didn't ask about my camera setup. They asked me about my life experience and what it was that made me start a YouTube channel to begin with. And that's when I realized the hidden advantage. Experience creates credibility. When someone who has lived through decades of work mistakes or relationships and actually has learned from it, when they speak honestly about that, people listen differently to that person. Think about it. Think about the difference between advice from someone who has actually read about it as opposed to someone who's actually lived it. Which one feels more trustworthy? Which one feels more real? On YouTube, the difference matters because the platform rewards one thing above all else, and that's attention. And I believe attention flows towards trust. Credibility alone isn't the full advantage. There's something else that becomes even more powerful over time, and that's clarity. When you're younger, you're often still trying to figure things out. You're trying to figure out what you believe, what matters, what direction you want to go. But by the time many people reach their 50s, they've already lived through life enough to know all that. They know what they think. And that clarity changes how you communicate, because clear thinking leads to clear speaking. Have you ever noticed how some people explain things in a way that just makes sense immediately? That is usually clarity at work. And clarity is incredibly powerful on a platform built around ideas. But here's where it gets really interesting. The real advantage of starting later is not just experience or clarity, it's something most people overlook completely: motivation. When people start something in their 20s, they often feel pressurized, pressure to grow fast, pressure to compete, pressure to prove themselves. But many people starting later in life, like myself, are doing something very different. They're exploring, learning, and sharing. And that relaxed authenticity changes everything because viewers can sense it immediately. Have you ever watched someone speak and thought, this person just feels so real? That authenticity is magnetic, and ironically, it often appears when people stop trying to impress everybody. Now, at this point, you might still be thinking something like, that sounds great and encouraging, but I'm still not good with technology, so I can't do this. Or maybe you think, I don't know how to edit, or I'm not comfortable on a camera. Yet those are all concerns, and it's completely normal. But here's the important distinction. Those technical things, they're mechanical skills, which means that you can learn how to do them through repetition. But perspective, authenticity, and clarity, they take decades to develop. If you have those already, then you have the hardest part of the battle already won. Everything else you can learn along the way. Remember when you were learning how to drive a car? At first, everything felt complicated. You were checking the mirrors, you were remembering the gears, the traffic signals. But after a while, those actions became automatic. And once they became automatic, you were free to focus on where you were driving, not what you were doing to get there. So what would happen if you started to treat YouTube the same way? You could learn the mechanics of it gradually and focus on sharing what you really want to share. So let's come back to the two questions we opened with. Why can starting later actually be an advantage? And what do older creators have that many younger creators spend years trying to develop? The answer is simple. Credibility, clarity, and authenticity. Three qualities that build trust faster than perfect editing ever will. Because when someone speaks from lived experience, people don't just watch, they listen. So if you've been thinking about starting a YouTube channel, but have been hesitating because you feel that you might be late to the party, consider this. You might not be late at all. You might be arriving with something many creators are still trying to develop, perspective. And sometimes the best moment to start something new is exactly when you believe you've already missed the opportunity. Because that is often the very moment when you're finally ready to say something truly meaningful. If this resonates with you, then subscribe and leave a comment below this video. I'd love to hear more about what's holding you back from starting something meaningful today.